Alright guys, this is DJ Doomslayer, and we got Jason Erdwood on the phone. So Jason, how you doing?
Doing good over here.
Awesome. One of the questions I got for you is, as a guitar instructor for ShredMentor Rock Guitar Academy, what kind of guitar courses do you offer?
Well, I know everybody kind of goes looking for something like, usually the first thing people are looking for is private lessons, because for most people that's all they know about. And I do offer that. I offer it over in person and over Skype. But generally, most of my students are actually in smaller group classes. And it's really based on particular goals, really. So, I mean, I do kind of gear what I do mostly toward metal and soloing, and various forms of rock. But pretty much, I'm not somebody that really offers like all styles, but the different training programs that I offer are really geared toward specific types of goals and specific types of players. So, like, one example would be my Metal Forge program, which is a weekly 1-hour small group class that I teach in my home, and it's 4 sessions a month, plus you also get a half-hour private lesson, so you will at least get my completely undivided attention 1 time a month. But the curriculum is completely based on the students, so there's not really a, it's not really a curriculum at all. It's me assessing how I can get a particular individual to where they want to be with their playing, and make sure that they can do all the things they're going to be able to need to do. In order to play the way that they want to play. So a lot of it comes down to just really analyzing what's going on in the music that they want to be able to sound like. And do they want to be making their own music, or do they want to be able to learn by ear and pick out songs? They just want to be able to play a lot of recordings. So it really comes down to what their goals are. So I believe very strongly in teaching a person, not teaching stuff. So I think it's really important to take all someone's goals into account, no matter how extravagant they even might be. If you want to be touring and playing stadiums, then you're going to need a little more than guitar playing. But I can kind of keep the idea of, that's going to require some live performance. It's going to require some music industry knowledge, in addition to all the stuff you're going to need to be able to do at will on the stage in front of however many hundreds of thousands of people. So it really just depends on what the person ultimately has as their goal.
Awesome, man. Now, for people like me that play guitar and would actually be interested in that, what are your costs and payment plans for enrolling into your classes?
Basically, I've actually structured things according to like the way that like a membership works. So that basically everybody's kind of familiar with how that kind of stuff works, and lessons kind of, they take a while. I try to get results in the shortest time possible. So it kind of depends a little bit on what program you're actually in and how many sessions per month that includes. And so, but it basically is structured just like any kind of membership. And I actually, as of this year, I'm actually reaching my 10th anniversary, so I've actually rolled out some different rate structures for like quarterly, 6-month, and even annually. Because it is something it comes down to a level of commitment. But basically, just kind of going with the rates I've always had. Basically, private lessons, like I said, depends on how many per month you're going to get, and also whether you're getting half-hour private lessons or full hour. But it ranges from $75 a month for just 1 half-hour private lesson, plus access to all the practice tools all month, to $250 a month for 4 full-hour private lessons. So it's kind of a range. It just depends on your membership level. And for like the group classes, you would kind of have to be in the DC area for those. But basically, like the programs that include 4 1-hour group sessions a month are generally at about the 200 range. One of them is about 220 for rock and metal songwriting. I also have some bi-weekly soloing classes that are those are 120 a month. So it's kind of ranges. It really just depends on what level of involvement it really takes.
Awesome, man. I saw that you have a Patreon for your ShredMentor. What are the perks of being involved in the Patreon for that?
for ShredMentor, right now I'm actually kind of reworking some things, so to be really honest, right now there's not really a lot of apparent at all. As far as the ShredMentor Patreon right now, that was something toward, like in the last couple of months of 2017, I started to kind of revive something that used to be an in-person class, which was speed training boot camp. I used to have that years ago, like around 2010 actually, I started that class. It ran for about 3 years until eventually every aspect of that class ended up getting broken down and added into every other class I have anyway. It's really just speed and technique, really, which is something that is kind of underlying everything. Like, it even makes its way into songwriting classes, because if you can't keep up with the tempo of the song you're writing, you can't, I ended up teaching, I just stopped having it as a class after a while, but I realized that there is a need for that, and so I started to relaunch it, but as an online course, and I started originally through Patreon, and I did 4 episodes of it, but I realized really quick that it's not enough. It's not really a good platform. I started to kind of look ahead, like, okay, where is this going? And it really, it's not going to achieve the result that that course needs to achieve if I keep delivering it just as an ongoing weekly thing. It's just watching me practice that way, and I realized that this is not going to serve the end user. So I stopped doing it that way, and I'm actually building the rest of that course on ShredMentor.com. It's actually live now. In fact, I've gone in a different direction with that. So right now I've sort of abandoned Patreon, at least as far as ShredMentor goes. For my album releases on the Jason Aaron Wood Patreon, I still do that prior to every solo release. But for ShredMentor, really right now there's not a lot to gain from that.
Scarred Hand of Healing in the chat room wants to know if you do the drums yourself on the albums or if you have somebody else do them.
That's an awesome question to be asked, because honestly they're all programmed, but I program them. I put a lot of effort into trying to make them sound as real as possible, though, so thank you for that question. It makes me feel a little better that I made it seem pretty believable. But yeah, I use Easy Drummer and I program everything.
That was actually a question I had myself, because I was listening to, it was one of your songs on Emanations, and like the drumming part kind of reminded me of Death, and I was like, it sounded too good to really be a drum machine or be programmed. So I was really curious about that myself.
Cool. Yeah, I don't play drums at all, but over the last several years especially, I've kind of I've really started to dig into learning how drummers approach drums, and learning the rudiments, basically everything that a drummer would have to actually do to become a good drummer and to apply these things, but without actually having to like train my hands and stuff to do it. So, because I do want my stuff to be real sounding and especially fun and enjoyable and playable. If I ever get an actual drummer to come and play live with me or something like that, I don't want to lose the entire potential audience listeners also that just happen to be drummers, that it's like, the one thing that's just like fingernails on a chalkboard to them and everyone else is just fine. I don't want it, because I can hear programmed drums a lot of the time too, because usually it's when people skip things like adjusting the velocities of every hit and purposely changing the timing, like analyzing how people make mistakes, and trying to make that happen. Like, if you start doing like double bass on your lap with both hands, eventually sometimes if you get out of time, what happens is your hands start hitting at the same time. But on its way to that happening, usually whatever hand you're leading with is closer together with the immediate one following. So if you're right-handed, I would basically move all of the second hits, the left-hand hits, a little bit closer. Same thing with feet. So I kind of try to mimic the human tendencies that people do naturally. So I program all that in.
That's really awesome, man.
Thanks.
Megan in the chat room wants to know what your favorite horror movies and monsters are.
Wow. I might have to reach into my past a little to do it, because I haven't watched any. See, I watch plenty of horror, but it's usually like psychological. It's actually more thrillers than anything now. So I mean, honestly, I'm just going to start with the one thing that was like my two, I guess, two things that were my biggest. I was a big Freddy Krueger fan. I loved Nightmare on Elm Street stuff. Growing up,
yeah.
I was Freddy for Halloween one year, and I just used to binge watch those movies, marathon style, just straight through over and over again. So that would be the number one. I think growing up, I was like into the classic Nintendo game series, Castlevania. So I did like just your classic movie monsters like Dracula and Frankenstein and Mummy and stuff like that, just because they were main characters in that game. But yeah, I would say Freddy Krueger would be my original horror movie monster love. And the next one after that would have to be Michael Myers, because at least at the time when the Halloween movies were coming out, for me it was the 80s. They started coming out before I was born, but I think Halloween movies were the first ones that actually succeeded in scaring me a bit. Maybe it was just the mood I was in. But I was like, yeah, that's doing a good job. That is a bit freaking creepy. So I think those would be my two favorite iconic, I guess you can call them monsters. They're supposed to be human, but evidently they're obviously supposed to be a little more than that.
It's really cool that you mentioned Castlevania, because every time I hear like your song "The Great Pestilence" off of Emanations, it always reminds me, like the intro always reminds me of something like Castlevania or something like that.
I'm both honored and I'm not surprised at all, because that was actually the music in those games also was a huge early influence for me too. So
yeah,
thank you for that. That's awesome. I can kind of hear where you're going with that too. I can definitely hear how that would be very Castlevania-like.
So in a recent Facebook post, you said that in the song Enchanter Destroyer, which is also off of Emanations, for those of you that don't know, you mentioned that the name Azog Billy, which was in the lyrics of the song, was the name of a solo project you had in the 90s. So could you tell us more about Azog Billy?
Yeah, I'm probably even saying it wrong, but I always said Azog Billy, which is half anglicized and half probably butchered. But that was sort of my project. That when I first decided I wanted to make music, it was in the time when I lived in South Jersey, and there was no metal scene there. At least, well, I mean, yeah, there was. That's pompous ass thing to say. Not really. It's not that there was no metal scene, but there wasn't a metal scene like the kind of metal I was trying to do.
Oh yeah.
Everything sounded like Pantera, and I liked some Pantera, but I wasn't about to try to sound like them or play like them. I wanted something much darker, and more atmospheric, and no one else was trying to do that. So eventually I just kind of gave up on trying to find anyone else to do it with me, and said, all right, whatever, I'm just going to have to get the gear and figure out how to use it and do it myself. So I just started kind of writing my own songs. I didn't know the first thing about songwriting, but I started just chaining together a shitload of riffs and going into the song, and probably wasn't very good, but it in my very impressionable teenage mind, it was everything it needed to be. But ultimately, that was the project that became what Sonuf is now. Sonuf was it's a name I came up with for a project that I didn't end up doing, because I already had the Azog Billy project, and that was my sort of solo metal project. And I had this idea in my head around 1999 to make this dark ambient project. I finally got my keyboard and really started just messing with textures and stuff like that. And I was going to go into a studio and actually record an album kind of on the fly like that. Except the day before I was going to do that, I actually got in a car accident, and that kind of screwed up plans on that.
Oh, damn.
And that project didn't end up happening at all. But then, by about a year later, I started to think, you know what, Sonuf is really what this project should be called anyway. I just changed the name of Dr. Lyle to Sonuf because I thought that it was a little closer to, well, first of all, it's not like it's any less obscure. It's just two other words no one's ever heard of. But they're shorter.
Yeah.
And it's not quite as much of a pronunciation challenge. There's not as many possible ways that could possibly be pronounced. We start putting an A and an apostrophe and another A together, and we don't even have that in English anywhere. So I thought in terms of, I guess, just a little less obscure, but also just in terms of meaning, I think Old Sonuf was a little bit closer to what I was going for in terms of encapsulating the ultimate idea of a solo project. Old Sonuf comes from the Enochian language, which is supposed to be the language of the angels, the angels of the Watchers, or the fallen angels, but any angels really. And those words mean I reign. They come from an incantation called the First Enochian Key. And considering that the words mean I reign, I thought it was a very appropriate name for a solo project. Kind of going back to the whole thing, or I didn't need anybody else to make that project. So that's sort of the long, or the shortened long version, I guess, of that project. But I started it in 1996 and never really stopped, but I had already recorded probably about 15 songs. I'm probably estimating a little low, but somewhere between 15 and 20 songs for that project that saw the light of day after I changed the name to Old Sonuf. I don't go around trying to let anyone know that music exists, but it's on YouTube if anyone's really curious about how bad I sucked in the early 2000s.
I mean, everybody's got to start somewhere, man.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I'm glad that I did. I think that it's been very, very helpful that I've been recording and writing since the very, very beginning, because they're separate skills, and then kind of going back into the topic of ShredMentor a little bit, that's one of the reasons that I have different kinds of programs, because sometimes someone's got everything they really need in terms of their guitar technique. It's time to actually start putting this together and applying it to make something musical happen. And it's time to switch over to the songwriting program, get started recording. So I kind of try to guide people through the things that I know from experience they kind of need to be in place a lot earlier than a lot of people would try to reach for them. I've had probably the majority of people that reach out to me who want to make their own albums. When I ask them, all right, well, you want to do that? Yeah, sometime in the future, but, I'm not ready. So, well, when are you going to be ready? And it generally seems like the assumption is that once you're a really good guitar player, you'll just automatically be this great writer. It doesn't happen. That's not how it works. It's a totally different skill. You got to practice just as much. So, yeah. That's a big part of it too. But so I am very glad that I did start, even if I think that music sucks now. I think it was a very important stage of my development.
Oh yeah. My brother just asked me, what song do you believe you poured the most time and effort into?
Probably Old Sonuf, Angel of the Spheres. Actually, you can play that one a little earlier, I think. That song, I mean, on one hand, I actually wrote the music for that song in 2005 and released it in 2013. Not like I worked on it for 8 years straight, but I returned to it a few times throughout that. And the lyrics, I think, were the hardest thing to put together. Because there's, like how bands like Iron Maiden will have like a song called Iron Maiden, and Black Sabbath has a song actually called Black Sabbath. They have like a theme song of their band. I didn't go out and make a song called Old Sonuf, but Angel of the Spheres kind of is that song for Old Sonuf. There's actually a self-reference to the band name in there, even though the words Old Sonuf don't appear. That I wanted to tie that into it, And I knew going in that song was always going to sort of be the old Sonuf theme song. But at the same time, I was also trying to sort of tell the story behind that and behind the court astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I, Dr. John B., and his crystal-gazing sidekick, Sir Edward Kelly, and their experiences of communicating with these angelic beings. So it was really, really hard, and the source material, I'm a very firm believer in going back to the original sources historically for things, and not pulling a Hollywood and just changing it, because I think it's more entertaining than what history actually was. But the original source material is written in this really, 1600s era font, and English spelling hadn't been standardized yet. So that was pretty difficult too, because the book is like 600 pages long, and the font is really tiny, and I had to locate the part that I was really going to try to, what was relevant, because the book's also filled with tedium. It's really just way too nuanced. So yeah, that was definitely the hardest song that I had to spend a lot of time. It was the most painstaking effort, but I'm really glad that I ended up doing the things to it that I did before I released it, because that song got a complete makeover when I was working on it to finish it finally.
Yeah, I really do like all your old Sona songs that I've listened to, but that one really sticks out with me because it just starts out really strong, and it follows through all the way till the end being really strong and technical and consistent and great. So I can tell you.
The song before it is actually kind of part of that song. I decided in mastering to make the song before it, Scrying, which has this kind of this eerie piano kind of atmosphere. That's actually just the intro to Angel of the Spheres. I gave it a name because it needs a name to go on the CD and all that stuff. But really, the full song actually includes the intro song, Scrying, as well. All that time from 2005 to 2013, that was always one song. But I just thought that a 2.5-minute intro was a little long to make people wait. But I really meant to kind of paint a little bit of a picture of these two gentlemen in a kind of a dark chamber, looking and communicating, across different dimensions to some other sphere. And then when it really kicks in, that's where the kind of story really starts to get told. But thank you. I'm glad you liked that one.
Oh yeah. I noticed that your artwork for your albums, it seems like there's a lot of time put into them to almost seem like it's portraying the message of your albums. But the one that always was the most intriguing to me is actually your cover for Emanations. And I was going to ask, who did the artwork for it and what inspired its design?
I have the same guy working on my artwork ever since Glass Idols, and that's my friend Cihan Burke. He lives in Turkey. I found him on DeviantArt long, long ago, long before I actually finished Glass Idols, actually. But we generally have a pretty good process of... actually, he's just amazing at kind of just getting the idea of what the album is. I generally just have a quick Facebook Messenger conversation every year and about kind of what the concept is. In this particular case, I actually had all of at least the instrumental parts of everything written already, so I was actually able to send them pretty much the whole album ahead of time, which was pretty helpful because I know that it was definitely influenced a lot by it, but I did actually give him a mock-up of the concept, so there's a lot of symbolism in this particular album cover as well. There's references to one or more of the songs, actually. There's references to the lyrics in the song Emanations. There's, let's see. So there's also Kabbalah influences there. So I'm going to look at it for a second. We packed so much into that. Okay, so, yeah, you've got the moon, first of all. I purposely made sure that he didn't give it a full moon. It's a little bit, the dark side of the moon is slightly showing. which is very much central to the theme of the lyrical theme of the song Emanations, that there's not just light and dark, like they're two separate things. It's just the side that the light isn't shining on. Everything has a dark side, you know, and I mean that metaphorically and literally, you know. It's because space is dark that we see the sun. That's one of my favorite Aleister Crowley quotes. You know, light is not the default. Dark is the default. Light is just some weird shit that just happens to happen occasionally. Very few and far between. And so it's a little bit of a jab at the fluffy bunnies of the world that cower and shun anything that seems like dark or negative, but it's not separable from light. The world is just more than just dark and light. So the moon being there and just being not full was very much part of it. The pillars, the three pillars there are actually representative of the pillars of the Hebrew tree of life from the Kabbalah. But I made the left-hand pillar of fire and the right-hand pillar of ice, partially to represent the ages of fire and ice. Anton LaVey talked a little bit about that in an article called The Unknown Known. But basically, in an age of fire, this represents indulgence. In an age of ice, sort of represents abstinence. And the cultural norm sort of swings between those two sides of the pendulum. The center pillar is also part of the Tree of Life, but in this particular case, it actually represents the song, The Seventh Tower, which is on this album. And it's almost imperceptible in this artwork, but it's actually the main topic. There's a reflection of it in the front. There's actually a body of water at the bottom of the artwork. And you can see the reflections of all of this happening. And that's actually another version of the symbolism where I'm talking about the dark side of the moon and the light side. They're just sides of the same thing. It's not separate. It's the dark reversal of everything above it. It's sort of a representation of the idea of as above, so below. So, and that was all part of the mock-up. It was supposed to be a reflection, because essentially that is what the concept of the cliff-off or the shells on the Tree of Life. They're sort of the dark spheres of the Tree of Life. That's essentially what that is meant to represent. Just it's a reflection of it or another aspect of it.
That's so cool, man.
So, yeah, there's a lot going on in that picture. But yeah, the artist and I had a long conversation about that. But, you know, I mean, what I gave him was so crude and basic, so what he came back to was, like, freaking amazing.
Oh,
again.
yeah.
So, yeah, I found the artist I want to work with for life. A lot of great artists, and then sometimes they'll send me their album cover ideas and stuff, and it's awesome, but I kind of already spoken for.
Yeah, that's really cool to know that center tower is the seventh tower, because every time I listen to that song, I always associate that center tower as the seventh tower.
That's exactly what it's meant to be, too.
That's so cool. All right,
I felt like it didn't really need there to actually be 7 different towers in the picture for that to happen. It's really the only tower I talk about in the whole album. And I don't talk about it technically. I just listed it because it's an instrumental.
And speaking of your instrumental track on that album, like, you know, it's very. I find it very interesting that you actually do instrumentals, because, you know, not a lot of people seem to really focus on doing instrumentals anymore. Like, the only instrumental I can think of that has that level of substance and creativity, and, like, you can feel the emotions of the song in it, would be like some old Iron Maiden instrumentals from the 80s. So, like, how do you take a track and make it instrumental and be able to tell a whole story with it like that? Kind of like what you did with the Seventh Tower.
Well, I mean, you kind of named it right there. I mean, Iron Maiden is actually the influence that I would definitely say was the first thing that got me to pick up the guitar, and it was kind of my first, like, the first metal band that I just completely went head over heels in love with. And, like, to a ridiculous point, like where it's literally the only band I listened to for a couple years, just on loop. So that's exactly where a lot of that started from. But in a way, really, actually, every song that I write actually starts with an instrumental. And going back to when we were talking about my first project at Black Belial, that was entirely instrumental, and so was Old Sonuf, until I decided to actually record vocals on one song the year that I was about to release Glass Idols. So I actually just used to always do instrumental stuff. But I started to realize the importance of that human element, and I think it's really, people have, there's vocals in most music, in most popular music for a reason, I think it connects with people more than any, non-human instrument can do. So it's just got a whole new level where, it's the original instrument in a way. Before we figured out how to make a bow and arrow and realized that the string on that can vibrate, and now we have big stringed instruments, and before we, discovered flutes through hollow bird bones, we just had our own voice, and that was the original instrument. So I started to include that later, actually. And the instrumental work actually came first. But to me, every single song, every track is it's like a place that you visit. And that's how I experience it. That's how I at least aim to make my music feel. So there should always be a little bit of a feeling of a journey. Because every time I create there's a whole bunch of songs that no one's ever going to hear, but even those are like little places that I never finished building. And so that's kind of how I approach any song. So in that particular case, I almost started recording vocals for that song. And I literally didn't start. I just didn't like where it was going, and I stopped and removed them all. But I felt like that song kind of was its own journey already. The only other band I can think of as far as influences, I know that Iced Earth actually had one particular one instrumental on, I know it was featured on Days of Purgatory, and I don't know what album it would have been originally featured on, but there was one on Days of Purgatory that was also a really cool interesting instrumental, and it really kind of felt like a journey.
Oh yeah. I know you just talked about Iron Maiden being a big inspiration for you, but what other bands were big inspirations for inspiring you to become a musician?
Early on, I kind of discovered Black Sabbath by accident, and through that, Ozzy. And actually, it's weird because I kind of I forgot about Ozzy as an influence, but when I look back, I can realize oh no, I'm definitely influenced by Ozzy here. That biggest one. That Bark at the Moon influence here, and so it definitely made its way in. But sometimes I forget about it. But definitely Ozzy. Some Dream Theater, probably not as much anymore, but that was an early influence for sure. By the time the early 90s started to happen, as it was kind of already going in the darker direction, I discovered Death. So Individual Thought Patterns in particular is a huge, huge influence on me. Through that album, I decided to figure out, what else does Andy LaRocque do in King Diamond, so that led to King Diamond and Merciful Fate. And then I discovered Morbid Angel, and I'm like, all right, well, now at that point it was just much darker stuff. I was pretty big into Deicide around that same time, around 93, 94, 95, but it wasn't really, I don't think I can call it an influence as much. Morbid Angel's definitely a huge influence, though, but I think once I started to go in that really kind of evil, dark direction of music, it was pretty much all about that from there on. So some black metal bands eventually made their way in there, kind of became prominent influences like Arcturus, Emperor. Some didn't go there. I actually kind of dug their early stuff and really enjoyed actually where they went later on in the early 2000s as well. They caught a lot of shit for being over the top, but it was. I think the total experience was totally worth it. So
Yeah, man.
Yes, and Necrophagus was their one really amazing album at the time. Probably most of them.
Are there any musicians like that you personally know, or just local, or anything really that you would collaborate with on any future albums?
I'm not really sure. I imagine, honestly, just full disclosure, I imagine I've probably become a difficult person to work with over the years now, because I've gotten so comfortable just working on my own, and I'm so adept at keeping my plate so full with things to do that I don't even know if it's a matter of being as open to it as much as like leaving myself any room to do something like that anymore. That's probably been a little bit of, at least a good portion of why Todesbonden new album's taken so long too. It's just I got so much else to do, and so does my wife Lori, and that's the only person I really collaborate with now. But I'm sure if the right person came along and I actually had the time to allot for it, then sure. But no one really comes to mind, and no reflection on the musicianship, because this area is packed with very, very skilled musicians in the DC area. It's not even on my radar. I'm just in my own little world, kind of just creating my own little worlds, basically. So that's sort of where that's filled my entire headspace, really.
Awesome, man. I got a couple more questions for you.
Cool.
Like I'm near the end of it, but how long have you played guitar?
I started in the beginning of 1992, so that would make 26 years now.
Damn.
Not all well spent, mind you, but if I could go back and start over and know what worked, it probably would have been. I'd be at this point about doing it, but yeah, 26 years now.
That's pretty impressive.
Wish I had more to show for it, but thank you.
I think you have a lot to show for it, man. Your music is pretty impressive on the technical level.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
For anyone out there who might be like interested in buying like your music and stuff, do you have any physical merchandise that's up for sale?
I do actually. For a couple years there, I stopped printing CDs with the idea that no one does that anymore. No one buys it. But I've been proven wrong, because I decided to take a shot at it and print some CDs for Emanations. So I actually do have a few dozen of those left. And I'll happily sign them if anyone wants that too. In fact, there's an option for that on my Bandcamp page at jasonaaronwood.bandcamp.com. I actually literally yesterday finished clearing out my attic and organizing things, so I actually have a bit of other merchandise as well. Mainly right now, old Sonuf t-shirts, and I think I have a couple of hoodies as well. So depending on where you are in the world, one of them or the other will probably appeal to you more right now. The hoodies, so now it's 36 degrees today. But let me see. I know that I took a picture of one of these tapes, the Azog Billy cassette tape. They're blank, mind you, but I've been thinking about including them as just a little extra bonus thing. I don't know if anyone would want that, but I found a whole box of this thing.
Oh wow!
I never really used. Yeah, I actually used to have this tape duplicator machine that would take like one cassette tape and duplicate it to 3 of them at a time at like an incredibly fast rate of speed.
Nice.
It sounded like an engine like running like really high, super high pitched, which filled an entire cassette tape like real fast. So I had this plan. I was going to be my own, tape replication center at home, and like all these tapes, I never did that with. So I'm thinking about including it with copies of Emanations, because of the fact that I sort of made the reference back to that.
Oh yeah,
A little extra keepsake. Outside of that, I actually have plans to. I'm going to spread it out over the year just for cost reasons, but I do plan to be printing CDs from the other albums. Really, the last CD that I printed was my acoustic CD, my debut solo album, Reflections, back in 2012. So both of those Sonuf albums and both of the previous Jason Ironwood albums didn't actually get printed to CD at all. So that's coming soon too. But you know what? I'd love to hear other people's suggestions. Like, what would you like to have? You know, like I know about a lot of different things I make as merch. But it's just a matter of, you know, having it be something that someone wants before I go press, you know, 50 to 100 of them.
Oh, yeah.
And store them.
Well,
yeah, right now that's kind of it. It's just physical CDs, and I have some shirts for all Sonuf, and yeah, right now that's pretty much it.
Well, that kind of leads me to my next question. Will you ever release any of your albums on vinyl?
If someone wants them, I am starting to see a lot more about vinyl coming back, and it seems like it's here to stay for a while. So, if there was a demand for it, I would happily go ahead and do that. That's the one thing I would look into, the best way to, the best location to do that, best company. Because that's one thing I'm big about, is doing this all myself.
Oh, yeah.
We're kind of in a unique period in time where you no longer really technically need a label for anything.
Oh, yeah.
For some people, that's great. So maybe they do need it. You know, it's not for everybody, though. It's not for me, really. So I would just need to find a place that can rely on the quality and that they're not insisting on $1,000 out of pocket right away. You know. So.
Yeah. I mean, I for one would get one of those vinyls if you ever made one.
Well, I would happily do it, and you know, actually, trying to think of a good place to set up a poll. But anybody else, if I can figure out a good place to set that up, I would love to hear what people think. Anybody else that's in on it, yeah, I would gladly set up just something to gauge the interest on that. Or if I find a place where you can just order them a couple at a time.
Yeah.
The artwork is certainly big enough. I always get into making enormous, so if I wanted to pay for a billboard for a month, I could technically put it on a roadside. so I could definitely print it onto a record without it being any loss of quality, for sure.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome, dude. What are the best ways that people that want to support you could support you?
I think the best way would definitely be to go to Bandcamp and have a listen to everything. If you like it, then buy whatever you like, the most, or even buy the whole discography. That always helps. There's always a discount on, it's about 50% off if you buy all of my solo albums. The other way is with my other passion, which is ShredMentor, is if you actually really want to be able to take your musicianship all the way, get lessons with me. Schedule a free strategy session and tell me as much about what you want to achieve and take lessons with me, because to me at least it's rewarding as releasing my own albums. It occupies far more of my head space, like most of the time. So it's, that's where I put a lot of my energy throughout every year, really, it's actually into my students and, into working with people that are energized and motivated, and that creates a feedback loop, because I'm energized and motivated, and we kind of feed off of each other and provide motivation for each other. So that would be the other way. And it is how I pay the bills. So.
Awesome, man.
Those would be the two best ones.
I'm pretty much out of questions for you, man. I kind of wish I actually wish I started recording when I was supposed to and got that first bit in there, because that was actually really interesting.
Well, that's all right. Well, that's the bonus for the folks that tuned in early.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
Cool, man. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. Before you go, could I actually get you to make a tag for my show?
Absolutely.
Whenever you're ready.
Hold on a second, real quick.
Whenever you're ready.
All right. So yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready, just you can say like, this is Jason Aaron Wood, and you're listening to DJ Doomslayer on Metal Devastation Radio, or just whatever you want. Just whenever you're ready, man.
All right. This is Jason Aaron Wood, and you're listening to DJ Doomslayer on Metal Devastation Radio.
Awesome, man. Thanks for your time, man. That was an awesome interview.
Gladly, thank you. I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks for everybody that tuned in and asked questions as well. I appreciate that.